Mute
Is
everyone.
that better? Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah. Good. Okay. Okay. Now we are muted. Can everybody hear me? If just a thumbs up if you can hear me, and let me adjust my microphone to make sure I'm up. Okay. All right. Welcome to year 3. Can't believe I'm saying that, but believe it or not, this is the 3rd year of the Adult Center for Jewish Learning. We are starting our 3rd year. And what began as just an idea and a hope has now turned into an ongoing program that has generated a lot of nice comments, not only from the people who participated in our program, but from others who watched the program. I've had a lot of nice comments about the quality of the programming that we're offering, and you're all to be complimented because you are, many of you, pioneers in starting this project out 3 years ago. So let me just say a word about 3 years. When I started this project, I thought it was important to create an online educational center for adults. I thought it was important that adults had an opportunity to learn about Jewish subjects on a regular basis, and I didn't want to force them to come out and see me to the synagogue or somewhere else. I wanted to come into your homes and see you. So 3 years ago, I dared to believe that if we ran this program, I could encourage regular learners to come on, to listen, to sit for an hour and a half, sometimes more than that, and come regularly, participate regularly. I believed in this project so much that I decided there wasn't going to be any formality. They didn't require you to enroll formally. I didn't set a charge for the course. I did it on the belief that if the product was good, we would succeed and the program would continue to grow by word of mouth. And that is exactly what we have done. So I decided this year to go back to something I started with the very first year. You know, I've been a little under the weather. It's harder for me to prepare lessons. So I said, I can't do 2 or 3 or 4 classes this semester, but I can do 1 class. And I decided to go back to Torah. I said, I started with Torah, I'm going back to Torah. So believe it or not, in the last 2 years, we have studied the book of Genesis, and we have studied the book of Exodus. And this year, we are studying what is called the book of Numbers. Now, some of you pointed out that I haven't been following the order of the biblical books. If you know the order of the books of the Bible, it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Those are the 5 books in order. And someone wrote me and said, Rabbi, did you make a mistake? You said we were going to be studying this year the book of Numbers. Didn't you mean the book of Leviticus? That's the next book. And I wrote back to the individual who contacted me and said, no, I know it's out of order, but there is a reason behind my changing the order. And I want to explain that all to you tonight. So we are following the sequence of books, but I have made the decision to not study the book of Leviticus at this time. After we finish the book of Numbers, we'll go back to the book of Leviticus. I'm doing it for a specific reason. All right, so let me review a little with you. None of you are required to have read anything up until now, but some of you I know have. The only 2 books you need for this course are your Chumash. It doesn't have to look like this. Whatever your copy of the Hebrew Bible is, that's what you need. And what we are going to be studying in the Chumash, the Torah this year, is the book of Numbers. It's the 4th of the 5 books of the Torah. So you should all have a Hebrew or English or both or whatever book that you can refer to, and that's what the reading assignments will be based on. I have mentioned another book. This is a book you're also familiar with, or the author. This is Rabbi Sacks. Okay, this is Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. When we started with Genesis, I had you read his first book, and in Exodus, I had you read his second book. Now that we're in the 4th book, I asked you to pick up his 4th book. This is the book of Numbers. It's called Covenant and Conversation, a weekly reading in the Jewish Bible. And this is Numbers, the wilderness years. In order to explain why we're doing it this way, let me go back a little bit. All right. If I asked you, what is the first of the 5 books of the Hebrew Bible or the Torah, you would tell me it's the book of Genesis, right? Then comes Exodus. Then comes Leviticus, which we're skipping. Then comes Numbers. Then comes Deuteronomy, 5 books. They are sometimes referred to as the 5 books of Moses because Moses was the one who set this down into writing at God's command. And so these 5 books are referred to as Chamishe Chumshe Torah, or Chumash, which means the 5 books of Moses. And when you see them in the synagogue, they're in a very long scroll. We call that the Torah. So this is the Torah. I want to explain to you why I decided to handle the books the way I did. There are 5 books in the Torah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can give them numbers A, B, C, D, E. But I'm going to suggest to you, you think of a different way of reading them tonight. The order of reading the books goes like this. It goes A, B, C, B, A, okay? A, B, C, C is in the middle, and we go backward, B, A, okay. So the first book we read, the first book in our study of Torah we read was called Genesis or Bereshit, okay? Bereshit tells us the early history of the world. It's the prehistory of Israel. It tells you where we came from. That's book number 1. Before we tell you what Israel is about, we're going to tell you where Israel came from. You have to read the book of Genesis. And if you read the book of Genesis, let me just go over the highlights with you. This is your fast 2-minute breakdown. God creates the world in 7 days, including all of the various land, sea, and air creatures, as well as the vegetation. He concludes his work by creating human beings. And you go very quick. After 20 generations of humanity, which continued to disappoint God because they continue to behave in a way he does not approve of, after 20 generations of people who proved to be less than worthy, God creates the ancestors of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We call those the 3 patriarchs, all right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are the origins, the founders of the Jewish people. Now, you know the stories in Genesis, stories of Abraham, stories of Isaac, stories of Jacob. Eventually, Jacob marries. He has 2 wives and 2 concubines, and he has 12 sons, 12 sons. And those 12 sons become the originators, the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Continuing in the book of Genesis, one of the sons is a young man by the name of Joseph. He is one of Jacob's 12 sons. He happens to be the son who Jacob is partial to. He is the son of Jacob's wife, Rachel. And Jacob cannot help treating Joseph very favorably. He treats him very, very well. He sets him apart, so much so that Joseph's brothers say, why does Dad seem to like one of our younger brothers so much? He's not the first. He's not even among the first 10. Why is Dad showing him partiality? And what we learn is that it is because Joseph was the son of Rachel. Now, Joseph, you'll remember, gets his brothers very angry. He makes them very upset because he's favored, because he prophesizes, he has dreams which seem to make him seem greater than he is. And finally, his brothers can't stand him anymore. They can't stand their father's love for Joseph. So what do? One day when he comes out to meet them in the field, they take him, they throw him in a pit, and they sell him into slavery. They put him in a pit, a caravan comes by, and the brothers pick Joseph out of the pit. They give them to this wandering band of Midianites, and they take Joseph down to Egypt where they sell him as a slave. It looks like the story is going to end very badly. Joseph, a young 17-year-old, not going to be good for him. And yet suddenly God favors Joseph. He finds favor in Egypt. He goes through several reversals. He ends up in several difficult situations. But by the end of the story, Joseph has made himself known to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And Joseph so impresses Pharaoh that not only does Pharaoh appoint him to be an administrative officer, a vizier over all Egypt, he even tells Joseph, whatever you do, you have my approval. to bring the story of Genesis to a close. After Joseph has been the head of Egypt, the vizier in Egypt for several years, his family comes down to see him. They've run out of food because there's a famine. And Joseph's brothers, not recognizing him, come and they say, "We have come to Egypt to buy food." And of course, Joseph tests them. And in the end, he reveals to them that he is, in fact, their brother. And finally, he tells his brothers, "Look, there's another 5 years of famine yet to come. Tell your father, tell Jacob, my father, to come down. I want you all to come down. You're going to live with me here in Egypt. You're going to be treated very well. You'll all live in the land of Goshen." Brothers go back. They tell Father Jacob the story. Jacob is unbelieving. He can't believe that his son, who he thought was dead, is still alive. And Jacob and the entire family come to Egypt. Joseph welcomes them. He sets them in a beautiful land for their herds. He introduces them to Pharaoh. They live in great style. And during this time, the people grow so much. The people are so fertile. They're so prolific that by the end of the story, after Joseph has died and that generation has died, the Jewish family has turned into a whole people, has turned into a tribe, Jacob and the sons of Israel. And our last scenes are the death of Jacob, who is buried back in the land of Israel. And finally, we read about the death of Joseph. That is the book of Exodus, okay? That's book number 1. And book number 1 is kind of the prologue, okay? It tells you, oh, all right, we're going to study the Jewish people and we want to study what Judaism is about. But in order for you to figure out who the Jews are, we've got to tell you a story. So we're going to tell you about the world, about the creation of humanity. We're going to tell you about the history of nations. And finally, at the end of this first book, we're going to tell you where the people of Israel, where the ancestors came from. Okay, prologue, okay? The last book of the Hebrew Bible, called Deuteronomy, is called epilogue, which means that's going to tell you what's going to happen in the future. If the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, tells you where did the Jewish people come from, what the history was before them, the book of Deuteronomy, which is the last book in the Bible, Moses is going to tell the Jewish people what their future is going to be. He says, you are a people singled out by God for a special destiny, and this is going to be your destiny. This is going to be your history. And Moses delivers a beautiful, beautiful 3-part speech to the people of Israel, describing the purpose and the future and what is to come for the Jewish people. That's the epilogue. So prologue is A, epilogue is A, okay? What comes first is prologue, Genesis. What comes last is epilogue. What are the next 2 sections that come in? Next 2 sections that come in are the history of the Jewish people, okay? History of the Jewish people. Exodus and Numbers, okay? And I'm going to call those B. So if, and I'll give you a chart for this. So if Genesis is A and Deuteronomy is A, then Exodus and Numbers are B. What is the story in Exodus and Numbers? It's really, really simple. It's how did the Jewish people become the Jewish people? We start in Egypt with slavery, and we end in Numbers where we're on the verge of, we're on the edge of the land of Israel. What we started last semester was the first part of a long journey. This course is called The Long Journey, okay? Actually, it's really called The Long Journey to Freedom. It's taken from a phrase coined by Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela once spoke of and even wrote about the subject. He said, the march to history is not a short march. The march to freedom, to liberty, to independence is a long march, and it doesn't take place in a day or even in a week or even in a month or even in a year. There is a long march to freedom, and in order for a people to go from being a slave people to a free people, they have to go through this process. They have to go through this entire long walk. How long a walk? 40 years, I'll tell you right now. It's going to take the Jewish people 40 years from their slavery in Egypt until they become the people that will enter the land. So if you want to know how long a period of time it can be 40 years. It can actually be even longer than 40 years. Freedom is not won instantly. Freedom does not begin when a slave leaves slavery. Freedom is a process that only starts, okay? Now, let me tell you about book 2, which is the book of Exodus, and you already know this story, so I'll have brought you right up to date. Book of Exodus. Eventually, a new Pharaoh comes to power who does not know Joseph, and he reduces all of Joseph's brothers, his tribes, his people, he reduces them to slavery. And after 210 years of serving as slaves in the land of Egypt, God finally commands one of these Hebrews, a man known as Moses. He commands Moses and he tells him to lead the people of Israel who are slaves. He says, your job, Moses, is to go back and tell Pharaoh that you are to take this people and they are to be brought to me. They are my people. Pharaoh has to let them go. And of course, Moses goes back. He tells Pharaoh the message. The God of the Hebrew people has spoken to me, and he has told me that they are his people, and he intends to redeem them. He intends to keep the promise he made to them. He's going to bring them out of slavery. They're no longer your people, Pharaoh. God is now redeeming them. They are God's people again. Let them go. Let them go. Let them free. And of course, Pharaoh refuses, and God has to convince Pharaoh to give in to his request. So we are told that in a series of miracles, and there are a bunch of miracles, including 10 plagues, which God sends upon the Egyptians, after a period that takes almost 9 or 10 months, finally Pharaoh is convinced to let the Jewish people go. It takes 10 plagues, it takes a lot of messages, but finally Pharaoh says to Moses, on the night of the 10th plague, the night of the death of the firstborn in Egypt, he says, Moses, take your people, bring them out of Egypt, take them to your God, and pray for us, pray on behalf of Egypt and myself. At that word, on that very night, Moses gathers the Hebrew slaves together. They have been in their homes that evening. Moses gathers them and they begin to march out of the land of Egypt. It looks like they're free. Turns out it's not quite so easy because Pharaoh, remember, changes his mind. And after the people have wandered away and have been gone for about a week, Pharaoh says to himself, what have I done? I've emptied all the slaves out of Egypt. We're going to have to do the work ourselves. And Pharaoh changes his mind and he sends his officers and his horsemen and his chariots. He says, go get those slaves that I just let go, catch them and bring them back. They're going to be here. Anybody who resists you, deal with them and bring the rest of the people back. We are told that the Egyptians catch up with the Jewish people at the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea, remember? And the Jewish people are in a little bit of trouble because there they are, right at the bank of the sea, and they can't go any farther. They're stopped. The Red Sea is in their way. They can't cross the Red Sea. They can't get out of Egypt. And suddenly they look behind them and they see the dust of Pharaoh's army approaching. And they turn to Moses and they say, Moses, why did you bring us out of slavery? What was the purpose of doing this? We're going to be harmed. We're going to be hurt. Pharaoh's army will attack. People will die. Did you bring us out merely to have us die here in the wilderness? And Moses says, do not lose trust. And what does Moses do? You remember the very famous scene. He sticks out his staff over the waters of the Red Sea. Suddenly a wind blows, the water parts, and all of the nation of Israel crosses through on dry land. They cross through the Red Sea. And by the time they have successfully crossed, Pharaoh and his army have now come to the Red Sea, and they go in after them to chase them, to bring them back. And what happens? Again, Moses raises his staff over the water. The wind subsides, the water returns, and the entire army of Pharaoh, his 600 chariots, his horsemen, they all are sunk in the Sea of Reeds. And the Jewish people rejoice when they see this, and they sing a song to God. Then begins a journey. The journey is going to take 50 days. So let me just tell you a little, and we studied this last time. 50 days to get from the night of the Exodus from Egypt to Mount Sinai and to get to the Torah. What happens during those 50 days? Well, we are told the Jewish people make their journey in stages. In other words, they don't go right away to Sinai. They travel slowly, step by step. And God is directing them in this journey. In the day he sends a pillar of cloud to lead them. And in the night, the pillar of cloud becomes a pillar of fire. So the people are led through the wilderness by God with this pillar of cloud and this pillar of fire. And not only does God lead them and protect them in the wilderness, but he also feeds them and gives them water to drink. When they run out of water, God provides watering places, oases, places where the Jewish people can provide water for themselves. When they are hungry and they complain, they've run out of the provisions they brought out of Egypt, the matzah, and they say, what are we going to eat? God provides them with manna, daily bread, which falls each day of the week, and provides them with quail because the people got tired of just eating manna. Where's the meat and whatnot? God provides them with a diet which lasts them through their wandering in the wilderness. After 3 months of wandering from Egypt to Mount Sinai, the people finally are there at Sinai. They come to the mountain called Horeb. They stand there, and God says to them, finally, he says, prepare yourselves. I am now about to deliver my message to you. The people gather together in that very memorable scene you'll remember from Exodus. God delivers the 10 commandments in the beginning of the Torah to the Jewish people. He actually, for the first time in the world history, speaks directly to a people. He speaks the first commandments. Moses teaches them the rest. When the people hear God's commands, they marvel and they exclaim, Na'aseh v'nishma, everything that God has done for us and gratitude for all he has done for us, we will follow, we will do, and we will hearken to all the words of his commandments. Perfect time. This is the high point. God has spoken to the people. He has redeemed them. He's brought them to Sinai. He's given them his law. He says, now I'm going to make you my people. I'm going to give you a law of life. And the people say, we'll do it all. This was the high point. God and the people have made a covenant. And then if you'll remember, the last part of the book of Exodus talks about the people building something called a tabernacle. Do you all remember the tabernacle? The tabernacle was a desert structure. God said to the people, he said to them, during the rest of your journeys through Egypt, you are to construct a place where I will meet with you regularly. I want to meet with you. I want you to be constantly near my presence. I don't want you to think I'm not with you. So God commands the people to build this beautiful tent structure called the Mishkan, which includes altars and whatnot. And God says to them, all right, from here is where I will meet with you. I will speak with Moses, your leader. And it's from here that you will build an altar. And when you come to offer me offerings, you'll bring these offerings to me and you offer them as offerings or sacrifices. And with that, the tabernacle is built. The people bring the supplies. They bring more than enough. Moses and the architects put it all together. And by the end of the book of Exodus, Moses erects this entire tabernacle. And this all takes place within 1 year's time. That's the amazing thing. From the time we have left Egypt, that night of the 10th plague on Passover, till the erection of the tabernacle is set up on the first day of Nisan, which means it's set up on the anniversary of the holiday of Passover, okay? So we are 1 year in. So book 2, the book of Exodus, ends at Mount Sinai. But here's the problem, folks. We're not through with the journey yet. We started the journey. The journey was 50 days long. And 50 days should have been long enough for the Jewish people to get to the land of Israel. If God had took us the direct way, it's only a few hundred miles to wander from Egypt to Israel. If God had taken us directly to Israel and hadn't stopped along the way, we could have been in Israel probably within that 3 months. We could have already been in Israel, but God took us to Mount Sinai. He made a covenant with us. And so now, after 1 year, God has revealed himself to the people. And this is the point where the book of Exodus ends, and the next book of the Torah is Leviticus. Leviticus, which I'm skipping, is the story about what's the purpose of the Jewish people. This is the actual beginning of what the Jewish people are to. This is the real foundation of the Torah. How are we supposed to live our lives? I'm going to skip that part with you to go back to the narrative, okay? After the Jewish people have been at in Sinai have been wandering for 1 year, been 1 year since the Exodus. God now says, okay, you are my people, you have my Torah, I am in your midst. Now is the time for you to go and take possession of the land I promised you, the land of Canaan, the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's yours. Take all that you have. The time has come to get yourself ready. Number yourselves, count yourselves. You got to get ready for this big journey you're taking. Get everything in readiness, because right after Passover, the following month, I'm going to tell you to leave behind Mount Sinai, and you're going to go into the land of Israel. Okay? Now, from Sinai to Israel, it should have only taken us maybe 3 or 4 weeks to get to the land of Israel, maybe less. You know how long it took us to get to the land of Israel? 39 more years. 39 more years. You talk about the long walk to freedom. You can take a people out of Egypt very quickly. You can take them out with miracles instantly. You can lead them in the wilderness. They'll leave behind slavery, but they are not ready to be a free people yet, because freedom demands something more. What does freedom demand? And I want to talk about that a little bit. What is it that freedom demands? Freedom demands several things. It is a process. It is a transition. Freedom is not leaving slavery. Freedom is something else. It comes not merely by escaping from tyranny. It comes only by taking on the responsibilities of self-restraint and courage and patience and structure. Only after you've taken on all those disciplines can you be free. The Jewish people left Egypt on the night of the 10th plague of Passover, but they weren't free. We thought they were free. They weren't Pharaoh's slaves anymore, but they weren't ready. By no means were they ready to go into the land of Israel. As a matter of fact, God knew they weren't ready. So he tells them, I'm not taking them the direct route. I'm not bringing them right in. I've got to prepare this people. I've got to get them ready to be the kind of people I want them to be. So God takes them, brings them to Mount Sinai. And there at Mount Sinai, they study Torah. They remain and they study Torah until God is convinced that the people have learned enough and they're ready. And then God will tell Moses, all right, Moses, the time has come. The people are ready. Take the people, bring them to the land of Israel. Now I know that the people can go in. They will keep my covenant. What we discover, though, is that the journey of a few thousand miles, of a few hundred miles, can take more than a week, more than a month, more than 3 months, more than 6 months, more than a year. It can take 40 years, because freedom comes in stages. It does not come in an instant. It is not politically granted. Just because Pharaoh let them go doesn't make them free. Just because Moses took them out from Egypt doesn't mean they've left behind the experience, the memory of being slaves. They are going to have to make the transition. They are going to have to walk the long road to freedom. And in the case of the Jewish people, that long road is going to take them a lot of miles, and it's going to take them 40 years before they're ready to go. All right. So that is why this course is called The Long Journey to Freedom, because I've taken you on the first part of the journey. I've taken you out of Egypt, and I've taken you through the first part of the desert, and I've taken you to Mount Sinai, and I've taken you to the Torah, and I've taken you to the building of the tabernacle. But there's still 39 years of wandering yet to go. And you'll say to me, Rabbi, why 39 years? Shouldn't the people have been ready? And the simple answer, everybody, is yes, the people should have been ready. They should have been ready to go. But as you will see, they weren't ready. And we're going to talk about that. So that is the purpose that we are studying what is called the Book of Numbers. Now, some of you have asked, why is it called the Book of Numbers? And the reason is because there are a lot of counting going on in the book of Moses. There's 2 major censuses. You know what a census is? Where you count the people. At the beginning of the book of Numbers and at the end of the book of Numbers, they take a census of the nation. But the book of Numbers is filled with names and numbers and facts. In order to understand the Jewish people, you have to understand how they were composed. So the name in English, we call this the book of Numbers because it consists of a lot of census information, a lot of numerical information. But in Hebrew, it's not called numbers. It is called Bamidbar. Bamidbar in Hebrew means in the wilderness, okay? In the wilderness, Bamidbar, in the wilderness of Mount Sinai, the Jewish people walk. And that is what we are going to be studying here. We are going to be studying the book of Numbers. All right. Let me now ask you a question. I've spoken for long enough, a half hour, and I'm not going to speak that long again. I'm going to ask you for questions. I'm going to ask you to imagine the following scenario, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me what you would do. You've been a slave in the land of Egypt for 210 years. Against all probability, against all expectations, suddenly through a series of miracles and plagues, God has brought a savior who has talked to the head of Egypt and has finally convinced the head of Egypt to allow all of these slaves for 210 years. Pharaoh says to Moses, take your people, go serve your God, leave. The people leave in their entirety. Even though Pharaoh changes his mind, the Israelites watch all the Egyptians, their enemies, drown at the Red Sea. They start through the journey, they start through the trip. They have some problems. Moses, there's no water. Moses turns to God. God provides them with water. Moses, what will we eat? Moses turns to God and says, God, people need to eat. God says, every morning, let them go out and gather this bread that will fall from heaven, manna. People say, we don't have variety. God says to Moses, tell the people, and tomorrow the quail will come. They'll have variety. But people complain. And all during these early days, these 50 days, Moses doesn't seem to lose his cool. Moses is pretty cool. The people complain to him. Moses doesn't get angry at them. After all, they just went from a life where everything was given to them and they were told what to do. Now they're given a life of freedom. Moses says to God, look, these people are not used to freedom yet. They're not used to responsibility, God. You've brought them out there. What are you going to do for them? And God constantly reveals himself to the people. He constantly gives them signs so that they should know that they are not bereft. They are not without hope. God is right there with them, taking care of their physical needs, taking care of their protection. He is going to be with them on the journey. Finally, 3 months later, they get to Sinai, and the people get to experience what no people has ever experienced before. They stand at the base of the mountain, and there, as Moses goes up to the mountain, God speaks to Israel and makes a covenant, okay? And then they build a tabernacle, a place for God, so that they know that God will always be in their camp. They will not be afraid if Moses leaves, because his presence will be in the camp, in this tabernacle, in this mishkan, in this structure. They build it, people bring the supplies for it, Moses and the artisans create it and they erect it, and then they have this big, big, big celebration, which we're going to read at the beginning of our story next week, a big celebration to dedicate the Mishkan, and God finally says, good. People have seen me, they see I keep my word, now the people are ready to go. Imagine you're one of the people, okay? And now, shortly after the tabernacle, God tells you, okay, you've seen me, you see I'm here to take care of you, you see how I brought you out of Egypt. Now I want you to go in and face the uncertainty of going into the land and meeting the people there and confronting them and taking possession of the land and driving the people out. You can turn your, if you want to make a comment now, you can unmute yourself. Do we have to unmute too, or oh, you can unmute. All right. What would your reaction be? I've given you the setup. Okay, you were a slave. You spent your whole life as a slave. You left Egypt as slaves, but now you've had not only 50 days before God spoke to you, but now you've had a year of freedom. God tells you, okay, group, you're ready. Go into the land and take it. Is there anybody who would like to share with me what their inclination would be, or what you think your inclination would be? Let me ask, how many of you would be ready to go right in? Okay.
Jerry.
Okay. All right. So, Jerry, let me hear from you. Go ahead. Your hand is up. Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, at first, I thought, oh, sure, I would see the glory of God and do the right thing. But now the way that you've explained things, I would be like this. I'm not a happy camper. I don't like sleeping on a rug and sand. I want some hot water, a shower would be nice. And I miss some of the food that I used to enjoy.
Mhm. All right, so Jerry, you have described what you described the Jewish people. You would become a complainer, okay? I don't want to say you're complaining now, but despite everything you've seen, after living that kind of life for a while with a lack of variety, you would say, well, all right, I'm not a slave anymore, but I'm not in the promised land anymore. I'm not happy here. So Jerry says, I might start complaining now, even though God has revealed himself to me. I might start saying, how long do I have to be here in this desert and suffer this way? And how long do I have to eat this manna, which falls down every day from heaven, and depend on that? Can anybody else want to tell me what their reaction would be? Up to you. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, you know me, I always need more information. Okay, you want me to go in, then what? They're just gonna give me their land and let me just live here? Yeah, sure, take my house.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. So yeah,
All
I
right.
did probably need more information.
Michael says insufficient information. God, if you're going to send me into this land, you better send me with some instructions. How do I do it? What do I do? You can't just tell me go into the land, trust you. Yeah, you've led us so far, but how do we take the land? What do we do? Where do we go? How do we deal with the nations that are there? What if they're mighty? Michael would say, wait a second, forget that I'm not complaining, God, but if you're telling me to go, I need a little bit more detail here. I need to know that there's a plan. All right, so Michael would ask for some information. Anybody else? Go ahead, Neil.
I'm usually the one that goes first anyways.
Hmm?
So I would just go ahead and go. I see where I'm at, which is I'm sitting in the desert on a rug.
Mm-hmm.
So what could be worse going further out and kind of that manifest destiny feel to it. So I think I would go and say, I'll call for you when I get there.
All right. So Neil would say, look, I've seen what God did for me. I saw how he brought our people out of Egypt like he promised. I saw how he brought us safely to this point. We're a year in. I saw how he made a compact, a covenant, a contract with us. Where am I? Yeah, I'll go. On the basis of what God has done for me already, I am prepared to say, Neil says, God, you tell me to go? All right, so you'll tell me later on what I got to do. I'm willing to go. So we've got one person who's going to complain, one person who wants more information, and one person who's ready to follow. Are there any other answers to the question? Anybody else have another answer here? Go ahead, Barbara. Okay, you're not on, there you go.
Yeah, I get it now. It's a, I want to say you could have a reaction like of freedom, but you wouldn't know how to use it. And you could go crazy and do all kinds of, weird things. And because you're not restrained by anything that was done for you before.
Very good, Barbara. Now, Barbara, I'm going to pick on you a little bit longer here. You've left Egypt. You're out in the wilderness. You're still alive. You're eating food. You feel excited, right?
Yes.
Excited?
Right.
And you feel anticipation, right?
I feel like anything can happen.
Anything can happen. All right, now God tells you to go into the land. In addition to being happy and expectant, what else do you suddenly do? What else do you feel? Sorry.
The fear of something new.
Fear of something new. Okay, guys, to face the unknown is frightening. Okay, I'll show you this right now in your own life. The space between where you are now, comfortable in knowing what you are and satisfied, and being told to go to an entirely new future, that space is a very frightening period of time. We call that time, we call that liminal space. Liminal is just a fancy word which means threshold. What it means is liminal space is a time between what was and what is to come, okay? You know what was, you know where you came from, that's the past. Now you are told you have to leave behind the things that you know and you have to move into the future. It is a time of transition. It is a time when you don't know what you're going to confront. What's going to await us in the land? Are the people strong? Are they mighty? Are their cities powerful? Are we going to fight? Are we going to die? You don't know what you're going to face. This is a time of question. And even though God has been pretty good to you so far in the journey, he is now telling you, he's saying, all right, the past is over. Now is the time to receive the promise, go in and take the land. If you're like me, and if you're like Barbara, you're going to be a little afraid. You're going to be a little scared. All right, God has watched over me, but I now have to face some other challenges. And God expects me to start doing some of the heavy lifting. This is a place, let me describe it. It's a place where we are between the familiar and the completely unknown. You have all in your life been through liminal space. For example, at one time you were adolescents. Remember when you were adolescents, and remember when you became a teenager and someone said to you, all right, now you're going to have more responsibility and you've got to take on responsibilities. The teenage years were a kind of a period of angst. Why? Because you were leaving childhood behind and you had to make the transition from being a child to being now a young adult, okay? So that's one of the liminal spaces. That's one of the transition periods. What's the next? Some of you, like me, may have turned 16 and you were dreaming about your license and you got your license, but then suddenly someone says, all right, you got your license, and now you got to get in the car and you got to drive yourself and maybe other people too. That's a frightening moment, right? The moment, even if you're prepared for it, you get your car, you got to drive. You graduate. You've been through school. You've gone through high school. Now it's time to go into the big world. You're going to go to the university now. And your mom and your dad say, where do you want to go to school? And you say, I want to go to a school far, far away. I don't want to go at home. I want to be free on my own. Well, it's certainly a time of adventure. And like Barbara says, it's a time for excitement and anticipation. But most kids are very frightened before they go to university, okay? Most parents are very frightened before their child leaves home. It is a transitional time. Your children are leaving the world they know, your home, and they're going into a new world, the world where they will be responsible and they will have to make the decisions and they will have to deal with the people that they meet. Going from home to school is also a liminal moment. It's a transitional moment. You go through school, you go through this period of time, you go through school and you experience it, and suddenly you're out of school and you got your degree. And someone says, all right, go earn your living. So you got to leave school and you got to go to work. Another transitional moment, another liminal space. Then you finally manage to go to work and you get some confidence and you're feeling good. And maybe you save up some money, you buy a house. Then you got to decide about your future. So marriage, liminal moment. You haven't lived with anyone yet as a spouse. When you are married, you are moving into a period of singlehood, to a period of wedded oneness, a period of togetherness. The weddings is a period of transition from one state to another. Divorce, for those of you who have experienced it, is a period of transition. The marriage didn't work out, things didn't work out the way we thought they would. We have to start life again. That's a very frightening moment. I'm not used to dating. I'm not used to being in the world again. That's another pivotal moment. Illness, when you face your first serious illness, that's a liminal moment. When the end of life comes and you're facing end of life issues, moments, okay? Life is filled with liminal moments. We do not get through life without going through them. You have already, because you are all adults, gone through several significant liminal moments in your life. And Judaism provides a ceremony for each stage. You're going to go from child to a teen, we give you bar mitzvah. You're going to go through school, we give you school. You're going to go through marriage, we give you a marriage ceremony, you stand under a chuppah. We're going to, there are rituals in each part of Jewish life to take you from the unknown, from the known to the unknown. Randy and I, about 2 years ago, most of the things in life were certain, except we didn't know what it was like to be a grandparent. We were dreaming about what it would be like to be a grandparent. Well, our eldest grandson is now about 2 years old, right?
20 months.
20 months old. Our youngest one is 3 months old. And we're just discovering, no one gave us a manual. When we went to meet our grandchildren, no one said, this is how you talk to them, this is how you play with them, this is how you interact with them. We learned by doing. And was it scary? a little bit scary. Sure, a little bit. We loved them and that was wonderful. But, you know, they should send home a manual with these things. They shouldn't just give you a child when you walk out of the hospital. They should send home instructions. So life is filled with liminal moments, okay? Not only for individuals, but also for a nation as well, okay? When the Jewish people leave Egypt, they are at a liminal moment, okay? But it's not their first one. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you questions again. What was the first liminal experience for the ancestors of the Jewish people? What was the first moment where God said, leave behind everything that's familiar to you and go off into the unknown? Anybody want to tell me what that was? Who was it, first of all? Go ahead, Michael. Who was it?
It was Abraham.
It was Abraham. God started with
Lech Lecha.
his ancestor. What does he tell him, Michael?
Go from here, Lech Lecha.
Get out, get out. Lech Lecha. Leave behind your family, your land, your kindred, your home. I want you to go to a new place. And God doesn't even, Barbara, he doesn't even say, I'll tell you the name of I'm telling you to this place. God merely says, I want you to go to the place that I'm going to tell you about. I'm going to show you. And what does Abraham do, Barbara, when God tells him to go? Okay, I know you know. Okay, he goes. He goes, okay? God says to Abraham, leave. Abraham takes Sarah, takes his household with him, and he leaves. A liminal moment. He's leaving behind the familiar. He's established. He's famous. He's secure where he is. But God says, no, no, no. I don't want you to be secure. I want you to travel. You're going to take a journey. And Abraham journeys. He's the first journeyer. The first Jew is the first journeyer, okay? But Abraham isn't the last journeyer. There's all of our patriarchs journey. Remember the story, remind some of you, Jacob has a brother, Esav, and Jacob steals the blessing from his brother Esav, and he hears from his mother that his brother Esav is very angry with him. And the mother says, you know what, better you not stay here. Why don't you go to my relatives back in the land of Syria, Aram, go there, see my family, stay there for a while, and when your brother's anger has blown over, I'll call you back. Jacob listens to his mother. He secures a blessing from his father, Isaac, and he leaves the land to go into the unknown. That's a liminal journey, okay? And he spends a long time with this, but he spends 22 years there. And then at a certain point, he's told by God, now go back, another journey. Now, the interesting thing is, the two great revelations of Jacob take place when he's leaving the land of Israel and when he's coming back. God speaks to you in liminal moments, that when God tells you to take a chance, when God tells you, I want you to move in a different direction, in a way God communicates this to you. He tells you, this is what I want from you. Trust in me and take the step, make the journey. And Jacob leaves his father's house and stays with his uncle Laban and marries and starts a whole new life there. And 22 years later, when he feels threatened by his father-in-law, God tells him, leave the land of your father-in-law, go back to the land of Israel, and be prepared to meet your brother Esav, who you cheated all those years ago. All of the Jewish people, starting with the ancestors, have these liminal moments. These are moments when they have to move from what they know to what they don't know. And the question is, will they have the faith to make the move? Okay, that's the question. Will they have the faith in God to journey from the known with the trust that whatever is awaiting them, they will be able to handle it? Now, I'll ask you again. You're all the same people now. Hands. How many of you, after about a year and about a little over a year in the wilderness, God tells you now you're ready to go in the land? How many of you are ready to go now? Okay, all right, all right. You're ready at least to start. But as you get closer to the land and as you learn more and more about the obstacles that you're going to face, you may have some questions, right? Later on, as you will see, the Jewish people have some questions. So what we are going to be studying is the second part of the trip. I'm not going to say the second half of the trip because the first half of the trip, the first part of the trip was 1 year. The next part of the trip is 39 years. Why didn't the Jewish people go in right away? Why weren't they successful in taking what they had, learning what they had, taking the message and the assurance that God gave them? Why weren't they successful in going right in and inhabiting the land? The answer is because they weren't ready. And if I ask you, why weren't they ready? What will you tell me? Why weren't they ready? Go ahead, Cal.
Well, first of all, they didn't accept God for a long time, and God rejected them after the golden calf. They were unsure whether they should go back to Egypt or not, and many times they wanted to. Rabbi Sachs in his book talks about contemporary examples, countries not ready for freedom. Time after time in history, democracy is great, but you have to be ready for it. It's like when the Soviet Union fell and they left one day. We were in Ukraine in 2000. People didn't know what to do. They needed leadership. They needed guidance. They didn't trust anybody because all they knew was the Soviet Union and communism. All the Jewish people knew were slavery and bondage, and many wanted to go back, as you've said, time after time. So you have to learn how to live democratically. You have
Very
to
good.
learn about representative government. You had to learn, they had, and the fact is they would have gone into the land earlier, only but for the golden calf.
All right. What Hal is saying is freedom is not acquired through revolution. I'm giving you adding words to Hal. Hal is suggesting that freedom comes about not by revolution, but by evolution. Okay, did everybody hear it? Freedom isn't brought about by revolution. Just because you have a revolution and you bring down the tyranny doesn't mean you're free. Give you an example. The French were tyrannized by their king, Louis XVI. They had a big French Revolution. They cut off a lot of aristocratic heads. But by the end of the revolution, even though they killed all the enemy, they weren't ready for freedom, because being free from tyranny is only half the responsibility. You have to learn patience, responsibility, order. You have to learn what it means to take on responsibility. Well, Hal is right. When the president of the United States said to Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And sure enough, the wall came down. And when the Soviet Union fell, we thought, oh, it's a whole new era. It's a whole new period of time. They even wrote books about it. This was a new era. This was an era for freedom, that the old Soviet way had been debunked and that the new way was freedom, that now the world was going to experience freedom, and country after country would throw off their tyrants and they would immediately enter the Council of Free Nations. They would immediately establish themselves as free republics. Well, Soviet Union didn't become a free republic even when it fell. Hal is correct. The nations that fell in the aftermath of the fall of Russia, it didn't suddenly become paradise because they had their own problems that they had to face and they weren't ready to face it. In the Arab Spring, some years later, country after country was throwing over their tyrants. They were declaring freedom, but were they ready to be free? Were they ready to have self-government? Were they ready to establish standards and to set rules? No, they weren't ready. They got rid of the old caste. They got rid of the old oppressors, but they weren't ready to govern themselves. This is the tricky thing. And Hal, I think you're right. You can be out of Egypt, but you got still a lot of questions in your mind that you're thinking about. Can I really trust God? Is God really going to be with me, or is he not going to be with me? What about when God deserted me, or when Moses deserted me and I had to build idols and God was mad? What's going to happen when I have to go into the land myself and fight my own battles and God's not going to be there right by my side and I'm going to have to care for the land and raise crops and everything by myself? Suddenly you're saying, oh, wait a second here. I'm not sure I'm ready to do this, because Hal's saying, and we all say, when I was in Egypt, I got up in the morning and the boss master said, this is what you're going to do. And he gave me my work assignment and he gave me my food And I knew I was going to go out. I knew what I was expected to do that day. And I knew I would do my job. And at the end of the day, I would receive my compensation, my meal, my whatever. And it would go on like that day after. I didn't have freedom, but I knew what was coming. I knew what to expect. Now I don't know what to expect at all. God is telling me go and start this whole new way of life. And that's a scary business. That's a very scary business. By the way, many revolutions do not succeed. The United States is one of the few countries in the world that actually had a successful revolution that not only succeeded, but actually ended up establishing a government of their own and established laws and a constitution. The United States is a unique example of a country that not only threw off the shackles of servitude or slavery to the old country, but actually assumed the experience and the wisdom and the structure to govern their own lives. That is what we are facing right now in the wilderness. The Jewish people have seen God's work, but are they ready to trust in God, and are they ready to go into the land? Now, because God is God, I have to believe he knows the answer, but we don't know the answer yet. And so this book that we are about to read is one of the strangest books of the Bible we are going to come to. I would suggest to you, it is the book where the Jewish people finally grow up. You want to see where the Jewish people as a people grow up? The book of Numbers, that's where it happens. It all happens between the first chapter of the book of Numbers and the very last chapter of the book of Numbers. In that book is where the Jewish people learn the lessons of freedom, and they reach the point where they are now ready to go into the land and become a self-sufficient people, meeting whatever they have to face, enduring whatever they're going to have to endure, knowing that God will not do everything for them, but knowing that with trust in God and belief in their own capabilities, they will be able to meet whatever challenge they are going to face in the land to come. Okay. Any observations, any reflections about that by anybody? Okay. No? Oh. All right. I have, let's see, a couple of notes. All right. So what do you gain by all this? What is the book of Numbers, which is really, what does the wilderness teach you? It teaches you the following. It's hard to go from a place that you know and a life that you know to a life that you don't know, okay? Yes, we're leaving slavery, we're leaving behind working for other people, but that doesn't make us any more secure, because even though we're free to make our own decisions, we don't know where we're going or what we're going to do. Number two, freedom, responsibility, liberty does not come with revolution, knocking down the enemy, knocking down the oppressor, Pharaoh or Russia or the local tyrants in the Arab world. Doesn't come from knocking down the oppressor. Freedom comes after you've got rid of the oppressor. What are you going to do to establish systems to govern yourself and live your life and establish order and fairness in the society that you're a part of? It comes not through revolution, but rather through evolution. Point three, evolution takes time, all right? Okay, no one changes overnight. If any of you have ever had a child who says to you, I've learned my lesson, Dad, Mom, I'm gonna be an excellent child from this point on, you can pretty much bet that they're not gonna make it, right? Not because they're not sincere at the moment, they mean it. They've learned their lesson. I've experienced it, I know what it is. I botched it up, I failed, I'm not gonna do that anymore. But unfortunately, change takes time. You don't become a changed person overnight. It requires you constantly learning, sometimes painfully learning, the lessons and the structures and the laws and the habits that are going to be required to turn you into a responsible person. You don't get that overnight. You only get that painfully over time. Next. Freedom is not a journey which takes place in a year or 2 years. Freedom extends over a generation, okay? The slaves who left Egypt, who were over a certain age by the time they were in Sinai, God says, these people are never going to make it into Egypt. These people still think like slaves. They still bear the burden of being slaves. They may have left slavery, but slavery hasn't left them. They're still bound by the same dependencies and the same needs. They're not going to change suddenly. They're going to have to die here in the wilderness. This people will never be ready to enter the land and fight for it. But their children who are below a certain age, who grew up in freedom and who experience freedom and who are trained in the laws of freedom in the Torah, when their time comes, they'll go in, they'll acquire the land, and they will be the ones to establish the world that I want them to establish. So you see, freedom is not the work of just a few years. It can be the work of a generation or even generations. And finally, in our little story about wandering in the wilderness, freedom is not only a journey of space, it is a journey of time. It wasn't just a journey from Egypt to Israel. God could have led them there very quickly. It's not that many miles, a few hundred miles. But to get from Egypt to Israel required not just a journey of space, it required a journey of time. The people had to become mature. Now, by the way, the same is true of every one of us as an adult. We all in our lives began life a little idealistic. We believed we could do certain things. I know that when I was young, I thought I could do everything and anything, and I knew more than anybody around me, and I didn't have to take anybody else's lesson because they were antiquated and they knew the old ways, I knew the new ways. It took me a certain number of years to realize I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, and that people around me weren't as dumb as I thought they were. It took me a while to realize that lessons that had been drilled into me again and again and again, and that I had felt free to ignore, were very, very important lessons that I was going to have to learn in my own life. And unfortunately, I did not always learn those lessons by listening to the wise advice of others. I learned those lessons by making my own stupid choices and falling into error and having to suffer the consequences. How many of you, in terms of the things that you've learned in your life, how many of you can say that you have learned more from your failures or from your disappointments in life than your successes? Can anybody say that? Okay, probably a lot of us can, okay? And if you get to the point where we are now, you know, where we have a lot of years, we say, God, why didn't you give me this wisdom and this understanding when I was 18 years old, damn it? Now I have all this wisdom, but I haven't got the strength anymore. I haven't got the koach. I haven't got the power to go out and make changes. It's a kind of an irony of biology and of fate. God gives us idealism and hope and belief and aspiration when we're young. And if we were wise and we took the advice of people who had been that way before, we would listen to them and we would use our wisdom well and we use our energy well. But unfortunately, it takes us a long time to learn the lessons that life has to teach. And by the time we've learned the lessons, we lack sometimes the energy to do what we have to do. This is a story that we can all relate to. And that is why I think this is one of the most important books of the Bible. In many ways, this is a sad book. It's a sad book because it begins with such hope. We have such hope. God has redeemed us. God has fulfilled his promise. He's taken us out of Egypt. He has brought us to Sinai. He's told us we're his people. He dwells in our midst. He's given us all these blessings we enjoy. You would think with all of that, we could take the final steps we need to this independence, but we can't because we can't leave behind Egypt. And as Hal said, we keep saying to ourselves, you know, the land of Egypt wasn't that bad. We got 3 square meals a day. We got fed. We knew what we had to do. Maybe we should go back to Egypt. And Hal is right. The people at one point already have thought about rebelling. Hal, do you remember when they thought about rebelling the first time when they rebelled?
When who rebelled?
The people. When did the Jewish people first rebel?
Geez, it wasn't long after they, I mean, is rebelling fetching the same thing or an actual?
Same thing. Same thing.
Like the minute they left, a couple of days after they left Egypt.
Okay. They hadn't even gotten out of Egypt. They hadn't even crossed the Red Sea. They were already saying to Moses, why did you bring us here to die? It was better in Egypt. At least in Egypt, we had places to live and food to eat. Here, they're going to bury us and no one's going to even know where we are. At least in Egypt, we would have had a place where people could visit us. Moses, what did you do? Was it because there wasn't enough space in Egypt and brought us here to die? The people began complaining. Hal is correct. The moment they left Egypt, the moment they left, they complained. And when they saw Pharaoh and his men, Pharaoh's army destroyed at the Red Sea, they rejoiced for a moment. And then they walked in the wilderness for 3 days and they ran out of water and they complained again. Moses, We don't have water. What are we supposed to drink? We're going to starve. We're going to die of thirst, us and our children. Why did you bring us out here? Moses says, don't worry. Moses, we don't have food. They complain all the time. And God is patient. That first period of time, that first period of 50 days in that first year, God patiently works with the people. He says, look, I know we haven't established trust yet, but look at what I do. See how I take care of you. Establish a basis of relationship with me, and then you'll be ready. But Hal is correct. Unfortunately, the rebellion doesn't end. And if you think the rebellion ends then, the reason that the people are going to have to wander for 39 years has to do with an event that's coming up shortly, okay? The real sin that caused the people to wander is a real rebellion, which did involve, as Hal suggests, the people saying, let's appoint another leader, let's get rid of Moses, let's get a new leader, and let's go back and return to Egypt where we started from. Can you imagine that? A year, maybe a year and a half out of Egypt, they're already ready to go back and give up everything they have, all of the freedom, all of the promise, all of the assurance. They're ready to give it up for the security of Egypt. This is the great truth of humanity. It's not that most people yearn to be free, even though many people live it. It's that most people are insecure and freedom is scary. I don't want freedom if it entails responsibility. I don't want freedom if it means I've got to make choices and decisions on my own. I don't want freedom if it means I have to accept the consequences for the decisions that I make, and I have to pay a price for making the wrong decisions. If I offered you freedom on those terms, being human, many of you would be right to say, you know what, give me the security, I don't need the freedom. The truth is that most people look for security, look for authority, look for people to tell them what to do and how to make decisions. We are not a people who is anxious to be free. We are a people who are afraid of freedom. And sometimes when our leaders give us too much freedom too soon, we're afraid to seize it, to take it, and to be responsible. That is the lesson we are going to learn in the pages of this book. It's going to take us 2 semesters, possibly 3, we'll see, to get through the book of Numbers. By the time we finish the book of Numbers, you are going to be a lot wiser and a lot more cynical about human power and human ability. You're going to see that freedom isn't a gift that God can place in front of you and give you. It's something you have to obtain. When Nelson Mandela talked about the long walk to freedom, he knew that when the apartheid regime ended in South Africa and when the authorities were finally forced to give South Africans freedom, he knew that it wasn't going to come right away. That's why he talked about the long walk to freedom. He understood that the passage from slavery to freedom, from servitude to independence, is a long, very deliberative process that consists of a lot of small steps. I may not get there in the end, but I'm going to do whatever I can to advance my people's goal. It's interesting, except for Joshua and Caleb, no one else among the men gets it. Even Moses and Aaron die, even Miriam dies. None of the generation that leaves Egypt will be alive to go into the land. So it tells you something. Freedom, the march to freedom demands a price. It takes a toll, and we're going to see what that toll is over the course of these next weeks. All right, just a time for general reflections. If you have any questions or whatnot, this would be the time. Yes, I see that, yes. Shapiro.
It's Toby.
Toby? Mhm.
Toby, you have to unmute yourself.
I think you're still muted. Toby, you're still muted on the on your. Okay. We will take the mute.
Okay.
There you go.
Any idea of the numbers of people, the numbers of slaves who left Egypt?
Yes, I know precisely. I know precisely, and you will too, because we take a census right now. Over 1.5 million, close to probably to 2 to 2.5 million people leave.
Wow, it's hard to control that number of people. Do that.
Yeah, kind of, right? Remember, there's a point when Moses throws up his hands to God and he says, God, I can't handle all these people myself. I can't be responsible for these people. So God says to Moses, I didn't tell you to be responsible. appoint judges and officers and delegate authority. Just because you're my prophet, just because I sent you to bring them out, doesn't mean you have to handle them. Get some help. And Moses goes and he realizes that if he's going to do his job, he is going to have to enlist other people, other leaders as well. So you're right. It is quite impossible to believe that any one person or even any group of people could handle this number of people. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, I'm muted now. You did mention it, that none of these people will ever go into the land of Israel. Does that mean that nobody lives past the age of 40? I mean, is that enumerated somewhere? I mean,
Okay, good question. Good question. Okay. I'm getting some feed. All right. So hold on. I'm going to answer Mike's question here. I'm just going to. Okay. Can everybody hear me? The question, Mike, is not that everybody dies at 40. What happens is this. This is what happens. When the people finally rebel, an event that we will come to in another 3 weeks, when they finally rebel against God, God says to Moses, I cannot put up with this people any longer. I've brought them out of slavery. I've educated them. I've given them examples of how they can trust me, and they still don't believe me. God says the following, Mike, anybody who is 40 years of age or older, when they left the land of Egypt, will not come into the land of Israel, will not come to the land of Canaan. They will die out. And only after that entire generation, people 40 years and over, after that entire generation dies in the wilderness, those former slaves, then I'll bring their children into the land. So the right idea, Mike, is that people who are under 40 years of age at the time of the Great Rebellion, they will go in, but anybody who is 40 years or older among the men, except for Joshua and Caleb, that none of them will come into the land. Moses won't come into the land. Aaron won't come into the land. All that generation of people who rebelled against God will not come into the land. It will be their children that God will bring into the land instead of them. Okay, so hopefully that answers it. Okay, again, if you want to speak, go ahead. You just unmute yourself. Go ahead. Yeah, Barbara? Yeah, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's what happened last time.
We muted you again,
I
sorry.
found the little arrow that went, no, but how did God know that it was going to take so long to get there and say anybody over 40 is not going to make it? I mean, how did?
Because the answer, Barbara, is because he's God. God has something that you and I do not have, that no one on the screen has. God has what we call foreknowledge, which means he can see the future ahead of time. So God, even when he tells the Jewish people to get ready to go into the land, that the time has come to enter the land, God knows that the people will use their freedom of choice to disobey God and to do everything they can to get out of going into the land. If you say to me, how can God say that generation will die? Because God knew that that generation was not prepared to go in and to do what they had to do.
But how did he know? I mean,
He's
how
God.
did he know it would take so long? How long it would take to go?
God said, this generation, people who were adults, who were 40 years of age when they left Egypt, people who have grown up and have a slave mentality and have grown up and are products of slavery, they're not going to be the people that are going to inherit the land. The people who will fight for the land, the people who will trust in me, are going to be people who weren't marred by the experiences of Egypt. God knows that because God knows the people. And so, in a way, we're looking at the story ahead of time. After the final rebellion, which we'll read about shortly in a little while, God says to Moses, this people is unworthy. After all I have done for them, after everything I've done, after everything I have given them, after all the proof that I am real, when I finally give them instructions to go, they doubt, they say we can't do it, they say God won't be with us. And God says, if they still doubt me now, after all that I've shown them, they're going to doubt me forever. This generation has to die out. Their children, those who are younger than a certain age, they will be the ones to go into the land. So that's why the older people will die, the younger people will go into the land. It's almost as if we're saying, so long as you have people around who have remembrance and experience in old age and whatnot, they can be a hindrance. If you want to start a new way of life, you've got to get rid of them. You've got to start with new people. All right. Now, where do we go from here? All right. We are going to start talking next time with the first part of the text. And if you look at the reading list, now we will actually go back into the text. Next week, we'll actually turn to the text. Those of you who have not yet read the material in the Sachs book, what I have just done today means you don't have to necessarily go back and read it, but I think you will find that Sachs does it so much more brilliantly than I can do it or any other person can do it. So if you could read even the first 20, 30 pages of Sachs, maybe up to 40 or 50, that would be great. But start the first couple of chapters of the book of Numbers, and you're going to see counting. Suddenly the Jewish people are going to start counting. How many people are there? How many people in each tribe? What is each tribe's responsibility? Remember, now they've got to move. Now they've got to leave behind Sinai. They've got to organize themselves. They have to begin to start getting their lives into order. And I'm going to ask you next week, what are the steps that the people take? What are the steps that Moses takes to bring order and responsibility and freedom of decision into the camp of Israel? They're not free yet. This people has only been responding to what has happened. God cares for them, God feeds them, God talks to them, God protects them, God tells them to build a tabernacle. Now God says, you're not children anymore. Now I'm telling you, go in and live your life, take the land. And you say, how, God? What do I do? What am I supposed to do? God says, go to the land, trust in yourselves, enter the land. I promise to be with you. You will acquire it. You will take it. You're going to go. You're going to come to the boundaries of the land. And then some of you are going to say, well, wait a second. Shouldn't we send somebody in to check out what the land is like first? Shouldn't we send in some spies to see what the land is like? And you're going to be among the people who say to Moses, Moses, before we go into the land, why don't we send in some representatives, some scouts, some spies? Let them go into the land and see the land, and let them come back and tell us that the land is good, that the land is fruitful, that the land is everything you promised us. But let them also tell us the people there, what are they like? Are they small or are they large? Are they fierce or are they peaceful? Are their cities strong and fortified, or do they live out in the open? In other words, they say, before we go into the land to conquer, we need a report. Now, Moses could have said to the people, you don't need a report. God said you were going to take it. Trust in God. But the people aren't ready to trust in God. The people say, no, we want the information. They're like Michael. Give us some information. What are we facing? What are the strong points? What are the weak points? What is the land like? Then come back and tell us, and then we'll make our decision. Well, the spies come back, and unfortunately, they bring back a very different kind of report, and which causes the beginning of all the troubles we're going to see. Yes, Leslie.
Those people that, because I had told you at the very beginning, I did read the Sachs book, and to me it was fascinating because it talks about how we became, this story telling us how we became one nation and why God picked the desert and the wilderness for the Jews to be in. It's all very fascinating.
Thank you, Leslie. As Leslie points out, the place where Israel has to learn to become a nation has got to be the desert. They need the time and they need the space that they have to become a nation.
And it kind of like explains how we are what we are today, how we
Yes.
are, how we survived to be here right now.
Yes,
And we probably can talk about where we could be going
right.
in
As
reference to this also.
the book of Numbers is a story of our first wanderings. It's a story that is very relevant to today because in a way we're still in the same place.
Right.
Relate to this because we're on the journey too. We haven't made it to the end of the journey yet. But as you think about why Sinai and why did it occur there and why did God cause them to wander in the wilderness all those years, you'll begin to see that the place and the time that they needed in order to become a free and united people, an organized, structured people, it could only be done in the 40 years of wandering in Sinai. Okay?
So do read it.
All right, so do read it. The name of the book, just once for everybody here. Okay. So, and we'll send out the notice again. These books are called, this is Rabbi Sacks. He wrote one on each of the 5 books of the Torah. The name of the book is called Covenant and Conversation, a weekly reading of the Jewish Bible.
I'll resend it.
And we'll send it out in the mail to you. Covenant and Conversation. And this is called volume number, well, it's not called number 4. It's the 4th volume. It's called Numbers, the Wilderness Years. So this is the 4th of the 5 books of the Torah. And you can buy it through Amazon. You can get it through a number of places. It's not expensive. It's very good. Rabbi Sacks here, if you read the material, it will add to whatever I say to you. Go ahead. Oh,
Where
okay.
does that say stop?
That says, yeah, it says, are you sure you want to